Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
For this to work, every response to this post should be created with the intent of believing what I will say is both real and true. Even if you don't believe in it, ask me something about it that might convince you otherwise. This website in general is so obscure I doubt it will be found, so while here I will answer your questions about this event honestly, if I know the actual answer. A lot of you post threads here which are quite frankly just bull, and it derives in a need to believe in something more than what we see. I'm not going to claim the story I'm about to sell is any better, but it will at very least be true. The first character in my ID is a J, so for the sake of clarity you can call me James. I work for a private security company which has the utmost top-secret clearance globally. When I say globally, we essentially design, build, and secure facilities all over the world for different countries. I'm not in any way involved in asset control, so I do not actually know how much money this company brings in. The purpose of these facilities we design is to house and/or contain events. They are referred to as events, or as an example, EA 217172. The E is event, the A is the first initial of the country. Sometimes this will include 2 letters for clarity. The figure next to it represents the facility's number, and last the actual event's number. An event can be virtually anything, and I only know of 2 types, extra-dimensional and pseudo-human. The facilities themselves are built specific to the type of containment, or sometimes even housing for the events. I have been involved with the construction of 2 alone. The reason the company we work for is privy to what goes on with these buildings is because the people who find and capture them need to know how to maintain the facilities and keep them functioning as intended. They bank a lot on people simply not believing the stories about places like these, which is actually not a bad idea, considering. A lot of the time when you visit your local store, you'll see a magazine claiming real alien sighted. These are produced in bulk to discredit what is actually true, and if you have a good eye, you'll oftentimes notice when something big happens in government. A lot of conspiracy-related articles pop up. This is design. Now I'll continue in a short while, but if there are questions anyone has, I'd like to take this opportunity to answer them, or just clarify anything I might have incorrectly typed. I'm not being watched, I'm not being monitored to my knowledge, so take liberties when asking for specific details.
Is the Illuminati real?
I can't say for sure. The people we work for don't identify themselves, and usually only their nationality is the only information we have to go on.
Okay, shitposting aside, can you give an example of one event that is extra-dimensional, and then one that is pseudo-human? Also, why are 4chan CAPTCHAs getting progressively more and more annoying? When will it stop?
At first they believed the instances where an extra-dimensional event would occur, that it was alien, but the basic Roswell definition of that word hardly covers what it actually is. We think on a very linear scale, and our minds are very limited when we try to expand what we can actually understand. If you take a child, for example, and show them an anthill, but never give them any information about it, they won't know that. By stepping on it, you'll anger thousands of tiny biting insects. We are like children in this regard, that we have to be educated on something before we understand it. And that is the process going on right now with the extra-dimensional events. They don't have a shape and exist in some circumstances as light, yet the light they produce is warped. Kind of like how a black hole seems to warp everything around it, space-time. They do not know enough about them yet, other than they can only be visible inside the facility when they choose to be. They are not hostile, but constantly destroy equipment during testing. Communication is practically non-existent, and when applicable, they are led by creating large sources of light which they are drawn to. The bulk of the tests are carried out with light, as you could imagine, but I'm not privy to much else, and I've never actually seen one, only the video. Pseudo-human events are actually terrifying in my opinion, but I've grown numb to them. The National Reconnaissance Office has taken a lot of interest in the events in specific for testing purposes. As a little side note, imagine if you were a human that only appears human in likeness when being observed but loses all physical distinction when not observed. A human template, if you would, a body with no hair, no eyes or teeth, etc. Basically, if you want to get an idea of what these things look like, imagine a fully developed human fetus without eyes that is about the size of a human in adolescence. From what I understand, they assume the physical appearance of others they have encountered before and are able to combine the physical traits together and integrate them into whatever form it chooses to create for itself. They also have a habit of stealing body language, social cues, among other things that helps them appear more human-like. They do speak, and will almost always create a different history for itself whenever it assumes a different physical identity. The only unifying trait among them is that they are, like the first event, non-hostile and willingly adhere to the rules, but to be honest, I'm not even sure they understand completely, since they are simply borrowing social language from us and emulating it on a flawless scale. Something worthy to note here: the process in which they change their bodies comes at a cost. They almost always appear to be starving to death. Rib cages exposed, shortness of breath, loss of energy, etc. They'll eat and recover the energy needed to assume a new form should they choose to change, and it still isn't understood why they change in the first place. Sorry for the long response.
What is one occasion where a pseudo-human event took place? Does it happen a lot in America specifically?
I don't know for sure. If you have any kind of imagination, the answer would be yes, since they can assume any recorded form they choose. The information on them, little as it is, indicates otherwise. They are not physically adept at anything and weaker than the average human. Something else worthy of note is that they cannot recognize one of their own, so any kind of organized hostile agenda against the human species is not likely. I don't know of any occasion where an event took place, only that I was at a housing facility when one was being transported to it. We were informed of a drop-off and to have the room prepared for it. The label for the room to indicate the event class and number was a small number, 4. This means only 4 pseudo-human events have occurred close enough to the facility to be noticed. While all event classes are hunted, these are particularly difficult to find due to their ability. Believe it or not, the homeless are heavily scrutinized.
Why come here where there are no VPNs or proxies and reveal something top secret? For what purpose?
That much should be obvious. For all of the bizarre things posted to this website, some of them can actually be real, but no one will ever truly believe it, including you. It is actually almost common practice for people like myself to have knowledge of what is actually going on, yet not have the men in black suits watching my every move. It all boils down to the simple, no one will believe you. This is thanks largely in part to the efforts of government-run TV shows like the History Channel and series like Ancient Aliens. There is usually some truth behind it, but people don't watch it to discover the truth as much as they do for entertainment purposes. Adults want to believe in the unreal, like kids want to believe in Santa, yet both share that common trait of the belief itself, being ridiculed and mocked until you're afraid to come out and say, "I saw a UFO," or "there is a demon in my house." It's almost insane the level of fear we as humans have of believing in something more than ourselves, and we willfully choose to ignore the truth for the sake of appearing no different than the other people who are deemed socially acceptable. No one believes a thing I've said, and no one here ever will, so what is the point of keeping any of it a secret?
So these events, do you think they're supernatural or extraterrestrial? Sorry, I am still a tad bit fuzzy on what you're revealing, but soon enough I'll get there. Also, any chance for a peaceful coexistence with the pseudos? That is no more hiding. Do you think the people in power would shoot for such a thing?
Supernatural and extraterrestrial are virtually identical in this world. The pseudo-human events have existed to my knowledge for as long as we have. They don't recognize their own, and they don't seem to even be aware that for the most part they are not human. During communication, they seem to actually believe they are in fact human, but it remains to be seen if this is the truth. So, as far as coexisting goes and revealing themselves, that would be difficult considering less than 20 have been captured. It harkens back to the anthill analogy. We see about 4 to 5 ants on the surface, but there are thousands just beneath. What if it turned out half our species were pseudo-human? I don't think the world is ready for a reveal like that, but those are just my thoughts on the matter.
Very interesting. Now, what about the other ones? The Extra-Dimensionals, I believe they were called. What are your personal opinions on them? Do they hold any form of sentience? I'm getting the vibe that most of what you are revealing is generally harmless to mankind, which makes me happy. But I could be wrong. I haven't seen any of the wonderful events, let alone studied these things myself. And the pseudo-humans. Is there any intent to let them go? While I ain't one to preach morals, it just seems like a depressing life to be cooped up all day, sickly and alone. Also, back to the whole science of the pseudos. Are there any giveaways? Like a dominate trait or something like that?
Ironically, the dominant trait is neutrality. They never have strong opinions on anything, agree to almost everything, and are generally apathetic when it comes to critical decision-making skills. There is discussion going on about them right now, as I mentioned before, and the current belief about them circulating is that they are having a hard time adapting to having a human mentality. In place of personality, they assumed apathy to avoid appearing different from anyone else. They will never be released.
The federal government just spent $3 billion building this secret facility. Are you working for them? How did this pass without the tax-paying citizens' consent?
You're actually pretty spot on with this, so I'll use it as an example. When you see headlines like this, it is usually due to a secret project. Anyone can understand $3 billion for a water treatment plant or oil rig, or some large government-run building isn't actually going to cost that much. The interesting thing here is that more often than not, these buildings and complexes serve two functions. The first function is to actually perform the operation the building or plant was erected for. The second function is temporary housing for an event. If, say, a pseudo-human were to be captured and a facility was too far away for safe transport, they will house the events at locations like this one. People are very easily misled into believing the fake secret. Say you came upon a McDonald's that was actually serving Burger King burgers, you'd think you uncovered the big thing, because in the fast food world that would actually be huge, but in this scenario the actual secret is McDonald's is housing otherworldly beings. Once the fake truth comes out, people stop digging. In the article you linked, people are going to likely dig to find the truth, and once they get close, they'll suddenly hit something big, but it isn't the real big thing. The big thing is hidden beneath whatever it was you just found, and you'll go home believing whatever lie they've fed to you. I wasn't involved in the picture you linked, but some of the buildings do resemble what we design. Also, money is never factored in. I know they make money, but I don't actually believe they have a limit to how much they can spend. There is a small rumor they are part of an international pay ring where they just get whatever they need, and everyone in the circle contributes to whatever amount they put on paper. Also, I hope I explained that well enough. Apologies if not. How did it get by the tax-paying citizens? That's easy, they didn't pay for it. Local bodies of government, big and small, are issued gag orders and prevented from speaking about it under any circumstances, and in return, it is simply built and ignored.
What a sad existence for them to be captured and kept in a cell. Do they have documented lifespans? Also, how are extra-dimensionals captured, if they're light? And how are the pseudo-humans captured, if they take human form? I believe it, and thanks for posting. Life is strange, and the universe is unknown. Just sucks these beings got caught, and are living a life in a metaphorical prison.
As I stated above, I don't work with the capture team, so I'm only left to speculate on how it's done. They are drawn to sources of extremely bright light, though. One instance of this happening was at the Chernobyl nuclear plant. If you watch the documentary on it, you'll see moments before the water beneath the radioactive leak fused together. The heat suddenly started to die down, and no one can explain why this happened. If you look above the reactor, though, close to the ruins roof, you'll actually see a ball of light separate from anything else levitating there. This is one recorded instance of their existence. Their capture and containment likely has something to do with manipulating light. This was pure speculation on my behalf, though. I won't actually go anywhere near their room, which is actually just a singular long tunnel that resembles a subway without tracks. All along the corridor, they have different types of light sources, none of them being natural sunlight, and they occasionally install different kinds of light sources to test the event's reactions.
That's so weird. I was just watching a Chernobyl documentary today. Coincidence? I think not. Are the scientists cool? Am I wrong to assume they are scientists that watch over them? Do you notice there are more men or women working observing the entities? They better be treating them with respect. Why wouldn't you go anywhere near their room?
I'm not really allowed to talk to them, and there are usually only men on site. I did see a woman once, but I don't think she was part of their team. I won't go near their room because we have no idea what they can do. Hostile or not, I don't want to risk being killed by accident.
When do people get killed by them by accident?
I have never been directly told it has happened, but when any event does something hostile, the entire event class security is raised for obvious reasons. They didn't even bother to inform me of the reason, but during installation, I noticed an event ID security level had been raised by a lot. I won't go into the complicated details of how threat level works, but I'll just say one of the other events went from a 1 to an 8, which indicates a death had occurred in another facility somewhere else in the world. Accident or not, when you're running experiments on entities that God didn't make, you're going to raise its threat classification by a huge portion to reflect the potential danger it represents as an event.
How does one join such an agency? I specialize in certain non-human entities as well as fourth-dimensional etheric physics. What you have explained thus far is not what I am familiar with. Are there any other types of entities your agency deals with?
My father and grandfather both work closely with them. They won't say how they came to be involved, but from what I understand, it is a generational recruitment pattern that rarely deviates into civilian recruitment. I was essentially brought to light on these subjects when I was 16, and it became normal for me around the time I was 20. I officially started working for them at 22, with my father. I honestly do not know how they recruit, if they do so at all, outside of family members who have already been working for them. And to answer your other question, there are a few others, but I won't ever see them. I do occasionally get a glimpse of what kind of event will be kept in the facility, though, during its construction, depending on the blueprint, which I'm not shown unless I am being stationed there for 6 months. They did construct one in Mexico near the border. The location was perfect because the area is already heavily guarded by Border Patrol. This facility houses certain events and also prevents illegals from entering the country, since they have 4 miles of subterranean proximity sensors in all directions.
So the extra-dimensional events would occur like if a 3D object were to be observed by a 2D object? You could only see parts of it visible in this dimension? If information of this sort can be given out so freely, are there any other things related to this company on the internet or anywhere at all? You said your grandparents were even involved in this organization. How long has this organization existed then? At least since the early 1900s, I assume.
I'm not a scientist, so I'm not really sure I could give you the type of answer you're looking for here. The best way I can describe what it is, what you're seeing exactly, would be a flat wall of light that moves around off the ground. This wall doesn't really have a shape, but it is usually flat, or at least when I've observed it. Does that help? I don't really know their history, other than that they have been around for a long time. I doubt early 1900s, though, considering the technology to deal with these things didn't exist then. If one of the pseudo-human events occurred in that period, they would likely have been killed. My grandfather started his work with them well into his 40s and continued to work for them until his death. My father also still works for them, but I do not see him very often. They do make an effort to place us in similar facilities, though to their credit. Also, yes, there is actually a wealth of information out there, but unfortunately nothing that would be concrete or hold up in court, as it were. Whenever you read about a sudden massive project taking place in some obscure part of the world, there is a very good chance it is a front for the purpose of creating a temporary facility for the events, or an actual permanent facility. They constantly spend billions of dollars making something seem sinister, with the express intent of concealing the actual truth. They would rather you believe, for instance, Korea's president was being led by some random friend of hers, instead of Korea itself being used as a massive human experimentation project. Just an example.
In the time you have been working for your company, what's the most scariest, dangerous, or creepiest thing you have seen or experienced? Also, how much do you get paid?
The most scary thing is easy. They had been carrying out a series of tests where they would pair 2 pseudo-human events together and try to get them to communicate. Their conversations were about as generic as you could imagine. I did not actually see this happen, but I could hear a lot of noise and people running around. One of the events started to change in front of the other and tried to mimic its face. Some kind of defense mechanism kicked in and the other started to do the same thing. You basically had 2 of the events changing constantly but didn't have a visual medium to use, so they both became stuck in a perpetual loop of metamorphosis. No one knew what to do, so the experiment continued, and the end result was they reverted to their template and starved to death around the same time. I don't actually get paid that much. They know some people, like myself, will eventually talk about this type of thing, and they don't want the guy driving the $56,000 car to bring up the notion of how he could even afford it. or the big house or the yacht unless he was being paid top dollar to keep his mouth shut. This way at least I can be comfortable, but for all intents and purposes, on the surface anyway, I look like I work a very typical job. Their security methods are pretty in-depth.
So what exactly is your job description, education, etc.? I am more interested in the nature of your profession and how you ended up there. Who is your employer? Where does your paycheck come from?
I did not attend a college, so I only have your basic high school grade education. I was more or less educated on site. My primary area of expertise is actually architecture and engineering. I can't actually disclose where my paycheck comes from, but it is mailed to me. The nature of my job itself is to help design facilities, containment centers, etc. It's been a while since I helped design any, since the current models are so good. What I've ended up doing in the meantime is just improve on the current model. I can't go into too much detail about that either. At any given time when we receive news that a new facility is going to be built, it's our task to help design it. The new design will include specifications and details specific to the type of event they intend to house there. Other times they just want improvements made. I only got into this line of work because my father and grandfather were in it. It offers job security for obvious reasons, and you get the opportunity to live on the site, which pays more. I elected not to, however, because I would like to have a life outside of the facility. My father and grandfather both lived on site. That actually caused my parents to divorce since my dad was never home.
OP. Is the Air Force Technical Applications Center building on Patrick Air Force Base in Cocoa Beach, Florida one of these sites?
Questions related to specific locations of other event facilities are largely a mystery to me. I've only helped work on 2. The only time I actually learn the location of another is when a new engineer rotates to our site and talks about it. They never give an exact location, but they do give the state, and ironically enough, one of them is in fact in Florida, but it's not actually situated near a beach to my understanding. A good way to find event facilities is to find large buildings that have been fenced off away from major populations. The scale of the buildings themselves vary, since some of them house larger underground rooms. Also, before I forget, the National Reconnaissance Organization is one of the major players in event capture and housing. For every mission they perform, they receive a patch to the uniform, which sometimes relates in some way to an event. Just look up the National Reconnaissance Organization mission patch and you'll see what I'm talking about.
I find it hilarious that the National Reconnaissance Organization has been named one of the best places to work for the government. Damn, OP. I see the world as a different place going out today. Thank you for opening my eyes.
Okay, well, you've pretty much answered my question. The National Reconnaissance Organization is one of the main occupants of this particular building, and it is the biggest, most unnecessarily confusing and complicated building I've ever been in. Although it is in a somewhat populated area now, at the time of its construction it was definitely not. Very interesting. OP. Very interesting. When you talk about transferring pseudo-humans to holding facilities, do they actually transport them above ground, let's say, at awkward hours of the day, night in a train or something? Or do they use the conspiracy government tunnel that spans across the country? Also, if that said tunnel exists, did your company help construct it? And if so, how long ago was it created?
Dumbs.
Well, sure, but that doesn't answer my question. Those are common knowledge as well. I mean, Area 51 and Dulce are constantly talked about, but there's speculation that they're connected to a tunnel that spans the country, which is what I'm asking about.
There is no secret process by which they are moved. Since they appear human, they can be safely transported in a normal SUV. I also say appear human. There is also speculation that these are actually humans with some genetic mutation, although I can't really speculate further than that. The convoys which move them have been as small in number as 2 cars, but this depends on the location and how far they will be traveling. The tunnel system you're referring to does exist and was built in the 1960s as a method to transport military personnel from one part of the country to the other. The interstate serves the same purpose, but it is incredibly revealing to planes. The tunnels themselves were on paper caved in and forgotten about for the most part, but there are still documents which refer to their existence. They may have in fact been destroyed, but they were then at some point reopened for various reasons. I've never been to them, but I do know they exist and could possibly be used to house events of a higher threat class since the location is perfect.
So do they do canned hunts of strange creatures or something in these facilities built for these events?
These monsters you are referring to largely don't exist in my world. I know of other events with a higher threat class, but I've never seen them before, and are probably kept in a housing unit in a far more secure location. To the guy who asked about Antarctica, you're right. There is a lot of stuff going on up there, and though I've never been, I spoke to an engineer who had been there and worked on a facility which was supposedly never finished due to weather. He basically spoke of a high threat class event which could only be handled in extremely cold environments, but that's all I know. So yes, they do have facilities there.
I have a question about the owners of these facilities. Are countries working together building these, or are they country-owned? No sharing. Wondering if the world is working together or on their own.
Depending on the facility's location, different nationalities will control a facility, but they are all in permanent communication with one another. None of them are specifically owned by any one nation, but rather share ownership and costs. Usually the spending comes from the military budget, but that's all I know about their finances. If a country has events yet isn't in their little inner circle, they will build a facility anyway, usually under the Peace Corps banner. Large, white, uninhabited buildings in the middle of a desolate country is usually a good indicator.
Why are the homeless scrutinized or watched? Everyone's asking a lot about the pseudo-humans, I feel. But what about the extra-dimensional events? Can you further explain how they can be contained at all, and any scientific explanations thrown about for their existence?
The pseudo-humans suffer apathy. They don't pursue anything and have no drive to speak of. They just exist, so more often than not they are homeless. That's my guess. When they say they've contained them, that isn't the reality of what it actually is. They are drawn by sources of light and emulate light patterns which can vary. I am not with the capture team, so again I can't say for sure, but I do know the place they are kept is completely illuminated. Light itself may interfere with their ability to travel, but I honestly don't know. They don't communicate either as far as they know. Sorry, there just isn't a lot I can tell you about them since so little is known. How would one go about getting a job in the capture team? It is mostly military, though depending on the event they have brought in a specialist for consultation. The only specialist I know of was a virologist. Are the mortality rates very high? I'd expect so if the capture team does more than just pseudo-humans. But if it's just pseudo-humans, then it would seem like rather boring work. I actually don't know if anyone has died during a capture. It's possible, but no one here has died to my knowledge. Any exciting stories passed down from the capture team? No one is supposed to talk about what goes on, and the capture teams follow those rules pretty closely since they actually have a higher security clearance. Any exciting stories of your own? A few, but there was one where they believed a pseudo-human had actually wandered to the facility on its own. I don't know the details of that one, though.
Could you share with us the general interior design of one of these holding facilities? Even as a shitty Microsoft Paint mock-up or something?
The designs are about as mundane as you can get. The higher class events are kept further from the surface depending on what they are. Imagine a school with larger rooms underground and a massive tunnel shaped like a ring beneath the mock school building that has a single connection to the main building itself.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.